4 o'clock on Friday. Ted Ralston here, folks, at our Think Tech Studios downtown Honolulu with our show Where the Drone Leads. Used to be Where the Road Leads, but now we know that that road is paved by drones. Anyway, welcoming Song Choi, Dr. Song Choi from the University of Hawaii. Many functions at UH, Assistant Dean at Engineering, among other things, right? And running
these days.
These days, okay, and running robotics labs and such at UH. So Song Choi is joining us here. And actually, Song, you're a frequent flyer here in the studio. I don't think you've been on this show before,
no,
although we've been on panels before together, but this is, the theater atmosphere here is not new to you. You've been here many times.
Been here often.
Thanks a lot about that. In fact, other folks who might be watching who want to join and come on the show sometime, let us know. How do you get a hold of us, Siri? You go ThinkTech HI, and you're in. Anyway, we'll be joined shortly by Dr. Paul O, who is here in town from Nevada. Paul is the director of the UAV laboratories at University of Nevada, Las Vegas.
That's right.
And also he's associated with the Nevada UAS Test Site there, the FAA Test Site. He'll be joining us shortly. He's right now enjoying the beauty of driving in Honolulu.
Traffic.
Traffic, right, and wondering if he can ever make a left turn. I think he's circling Honolulu here, looking for a place to make a left turn. And he'll be in the studio here shortly. Anyway, we thought we'd talk while Paul was here and while Song is available about the notion of something very important in a robotics game, and that's these UAV test sites that we've heard about that the FAA sort of put into play a couple of years ago. And it makes you wonder, what is a UAV test site, and what does one do with one? What does one look like? How does one start one if one doesn't have one? And if one is one of the states that has been granted the right to have that bragging right, what do you actually do? And that then really leads to the issue of robotics in general and the evolution of these complex control devices. They're no longer just a single device. Now you have a control system and a device. From your perspective, Song, as a robotics guy, what would you think up that would be important to have in a drone or UAV test site?
Well, I mean, you know, we're looking at robots, and robots or drones are basically items that we're putting together that is going to be self-propelling, self-generating, self-sensing. So we need some sort of a safe, secure site that we can get these off and running. So in comparison, it'd be like Google cars or self-driving cars. Obviously, you don't start with the self-driving car in our regular traffic. You have a secure, out-of-way site, and we try to get all the bugs out and make sure that it's not going to go haywire. And once we deem it to be safe enough, we should be able to start integrating with the rest of the population aspects and the other, in this case, flight aspects. And you know, we should always mention that UAVs do not necessarily only refer to a quadcopter, even though most people look at the drones and all these things and they look at a quadcopter because it's so commonly seen. But a safe, secure site where we can get the initial bugs out.
So safety and security, which implies isolation.
Yes, isolation, because we don't want to hurt
away
anybody.
From people.
Yes, away
away
people.
from some place where you could have an environmental upset of some kind.
Of course.
Away from some place that has some invasive species of animal that would be irritated if you started doing testing there.
That's
so this is beginning to become a set of requirements that aren't necessarily easy to achieve.
Oh no, I mean, you know, I mean, especially here in Hawaii. I mean, land is scarce. We try to optimize the use of our land. That means having a free, secure space where we're not going to be running into anything that's humanly or animal-wise or even rare plants. It's a really rare thing to run into. And, you know, luckily, we've been selected to be one of these test sites because of our multifaceted and diverse terrains, and I think that's a great honor, and we just have to figure out how to utilize all
so
that.
There's the good and the bad. Thanks for nominating us. Now we got to go figure out how to make that happen. Same for Alaska, same for Nevada, New York, and Texas, and the other sites that have been selected. So remoteness, isolation, and security in that regard is important.
At least to start. You know, once we get all the bugs out, hopefully the next step is to integrate it like we are trying to do with like the Google cars and these autonomously driven cars. But we're not going to get to be the Jetsons right off the top, right? So,
And we're not going to have these systems like this running delivery of Portuguese sausage or
yeah.
malasadas right down the middle of the street here.
I mean, if they have it the way they want it, we should be having Domino's pizza being delivered by these guys.
Tomorrow, right?
Right.
Yeah, right. But that's not going to happen, right? Yeah.
Of course not.
So safety and isolation, and that also implies some kind of a perimeter safety to keep people from inadvertently strolling in, or even actually in the sense of some company who might have rented space on your UAV test site. They're not going to want Company A, who's renting space this week, isn't going to want Company B, who's coming next week, to snoop around and figure out what's going on.
Well, I think that gets into a different set of safety reasons.
It's a different type of security type, but we're going to have range security of some kind.
Of course,
so we're going to have some idea of some kind of a perimeter, some kind of a credentialing system, or some way to control who gets in, who gets out.
That's right. I think there's a lot of issues involved with this. It's not a simple.
Exactly.
Yeah, give us space and we
we're
can
ready
get
to
this,
go. Right.
That's right.
What we'll do is we'll make our ideas as fast as we can here, and as soon as Paul comes in, we'll test them on Paul, see what he's thought of it.
Oh, of course, I think that's great. I mean, I think if you look back about 10, 20 years when they started playing with these autonomously driven cars, I remember Toyota, Ford, and all these automobile companies had little, I don't want to say fake towns, but little play towns.
Play towns to drive the car driving towns, really.
And they had driveways and all this on. They had their own localized GPS
In
systems.
scale or full scale?
They were full scale.
Really?
They were full scale. And, they had their localized GPS systems, and they were reading off things. They had sensors to make sure they don't run into the houses or all that. And then they tested it. And I guess when they finally got much of the bugs, I won't say all the bugs. I don't know many computer systems that are 100% right now. They might get 90, 95% in terms of accuracy as to how things are done in real life. And once you have that, you have to venture out if you want to try to get that 100% accuracy as to what everything does. And with the drones or AUVs or AUSs, I think it's the same thing. We have a multitude of complexity because this does fly in a three-dimensional space, unlike cars, which is, in a way, two-dimensional, limited to something that's attached to the ground, right? So, yeah, we're looking at a lot of logistic problems, and
you bring up another point, another major difference. A car you can stop. Whether it's the right thing to do or not, you can stop, and it's not going to go anywhere. It stops. Something like this, if it stops, if it's a fixed wing airplane or something, it just doesn't just stop. You go into a high-speed hold or something, but you can't actually stop it. These guys, you can stop them, a quad rotor or something like that. However, there's a point when the batteries are going to run out, and so stopping doesn't work forever. So there's a whole dynamic factor that's been added by that third dimension.
Oh, of course.
By the speed aspect.
With the autonomous vehicles, we are limited in the fact that they are trying to follow paths that have already been set up. A three-dimensional flying device like this is not bound by any of these roads or anything. It's the path that it sets is the road. I think when we say it's going to stop, we're basically thinking about it hovering in one space, just not moving. And that's an interesting concept too, because who knows how that works out.
Well, this actually brings up another part of it. As you're talking about the ground situation for vehicles is set by roads and other access aspects. Here we have, we think, unlimited and unstructured space, but we're actually going to have to structure that very carefully. There's going to have to be mission planning and various forms of waypoint management or some other form of structured flight planning to avoid running into each other. So adding that third dimension adds that whole new concept of conduits that have to be thought of. So not testing just the vehicles, also testing the ability of the thing to fly a certain pattern and stay in a certain limited domain.
Well, we're always taught as engineers, critical thinkers, to figure out what is the worst case scenario in all these cases.
And that's what you test.
That's right. Yeah. And with the three-dimensional unstructured vehicle that can go anywhere, the possibilities are pretty much endless.
So actually, what do you test?
And that's right.
And you know what that brings into my mind? Well, I'd love to hear Paul's comments on this when he gets here, but the aspect of simulation, because some of these variations can best be handled by simulation, where you can run millions of cases that you can't possibly do in a real full-scale test. So if you run in the simulation numerous tests with various faults turned on, various lack of sensors, various weather conditions, you find that worst case, maybe 10 worst cases that occur over a planned life or 5 times the life of a vehicle in some environment, then that's what you test. Then you go to test that particular hard point. And if you pass the hard points, you're pretty well guaranteed that the soft points are within there. So simulation. Massive simulation could take on a big part of this. Let's pick this up when we get Paul in here, and we'll quiz him on what he's thought of in terms of what the requirements for a test site are as well. We'll be back in 1 minute, folks.
Aloha, my name is Kirsten Baumgart-Turner, and I'm the host of Sustainable Hawaii at thinktechhawaii.com. We air live on the internet and also on Oceanic Channel 16. I'd invite you to come for a fresh new show every Tuesday from 12 to 1 o'clock. I try to bring on guests that give us a different viewpoint on aspects of sustainability in Hawaii, as well as trying to unpack some of the difficult concepts of measuring and achieving sustainability, particularly with regard to sustainable economic growth and prosperity in Hawaii. Please join us every Tuesday from 12 to 1 p.m. Mahalo, aloha.
Hello, I'm Stephen Katz, and I'm the host of Shrink Wrap, which comes to you live every Tuesday at 3 p.m. on thinktechhawaii.com, and then it's repeated again whenever you want if you go to the website. On our show, we will be talking to all different kinds of therapists, psychologists, psychoanalysts, psychiatrists, people who talk about the mind, the brain, and about different ways to find happiness. I myself am a marriage and family therapist in practice here in Hawaii, and I hope you will join us because I've got a lot to learn, you've got a lot to learn, and it's a great ride. Thanks a lot. See you soon.
You're watching Think Tech Hawaii, exploring the world we live in, recognizing the changes around us, and looking into the future of our lives together in these islands. Great content for Hawaii from Think Tech.
Back live, folks, here, Ted Ralston, and we've just been joined by our guest, our second guest of the day, Dr. Paul O. Paul, thanks so much for A, finding the place, and B, showing up and being part of our Friday afternoon revelry here. And Paul, of course, knows Song Choi from
see you again, Paul.
In the past.
Good to see you too, sir.
And we were just commiserating, Paul, Song and I, on the various issues. It just began starting down a list of what a UAS test site would entail, because there's so much variation, so much newness, so much we haven't been through before that it's really hard to get your arms around what a UAV test site might be. We think of the Yuma test tracks, we think of Indy 500 as an automobile test track, but exactly what would a UAS test site include? And you have some background in that area. Why don't you tell us a little bit, Paul, about how you wandered your way into the UAV game and your thoughts on where the whole test site thing is and where it should go?
Oh yeah, thanks a lot for having me on the show, Ted. You know, my entry into drones actually began more than 10 years ago. I was actually, shortly after 9/11, where I was interested in flying inside and in and around buildings to help with disaster response. But back in, I think it was about almost 2-3 years ago, this is when the FAA started designating sites, and Nevada was one of them. And I was asked to join the University of Nevada, Las Vegas at UNLV, try to help spearhead their efforts there.
In developing what the test site would turn into?
That's correct. There's definitely the research component, which they would like to see the university take leadership on, as well as the public and private sectors as well. So just like here in Hawaii, Nevada definitely has a strong heritage in testing. Creech Air Force Base is also where a lot of our predators are flying out of. And so,
So you guys, the state has a lot of experience, a lot of background, a lot of retired people probably have some of this in their blood, and so you got a lot of resources you can call upon to assist
absolutely.
in the thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, some of the statistics are saying that Nevada has the largest number of drone pilots per capita. And I think a lot of it's because, you know, they came out of Nellis Air Force Base in Creech.
So what the FAA did is they picked Nevada, and they picked, I think there's a consortium in New York, right, around Rome Air Force Base, or is it around Stewart Air Force Base, some ex-Air Force Base in New York, and they pulled a couple of states together with them.
That's correct.
Virginia has
Yes.
one of the assignments, and they picked up some Mid-Atlantic folks as part of their team. Texas, there's a unit
Correct.
in Texas, Texas A&M, I think, is involved in that in some way.
Yes.
Then there's the Alaska, Hawaii, Oregon consortium. Kansas is part of that now. Did I miss one? Is there one more in there?
There's also North Dakota.
North Dakota,
Right.
okay.
And I think there's also New Mexico as well.
Okay, so here we have FAA coming up with regional distribution and environmental variations and every variation they could think of to provide a framework for running tests against that UAVs can be tested in. So the discussion Song and I are having, well, what actually constitutes testing? There's so much variation. It isn't like a current airplane, which has a very rigid set of FAA requirements to go through, which are well known. It isn't like an automobile, which is fairly well known, but changing as automation.
Also
gets in.
two-dimensional.
Two-dimensional. We have the third dimension, we have the whole unknown, we have no real evolved
Bounds.
legacy of understanding of what the hard points are that need to be tested. So, without revealing to you what we discussed in the first quarter of the show here, we'd like to have you tell us, Paul, what you think what would constitute a test site? What would be the pieces that would go into it? What would be the things that people measure? What would be the deliverables coming out of a test site that would be useful to a manufacturer or to a software developer or something like that? What are your thoughts on where these test sites ought to go?
Ted, I mean, you raise a very interesting point. I mean, it's such a wide range of aircraft that we're looking at. I think most people are looking at, you know, these type of UASs or drones as something that maybe people are trying to get into, the, say, aerial journalism or aerial photography. They see this as a potential career option, right? And so they're looking at these type of aircraft. And testing here in these cases, well, how do you make sure that it doesn't interfere with the airspace? Okay.
That would be just for sort of a stationary platform, just taking pictures of a wedding or a sports event or something like that, just another form of camera platform.
Well, that's right. And the thing is that some people, you know, aren't very diligent about things, and they're flying them closer to the airports. They're flying them in, you know, public areas. We've seen this also on the news, or sometimes they're flying them in stadiums and they fall out of the air, and you know, they can hurt the audience or even the players. So there's that sort of testing, but then there's testing on a much larger scale. And we're looking at, you know, aircraft that are, you know, the size of a car, you know, much bigger.
Or if you put wings on it, so you don't have the restriction of range that you have with a quadrotor, now you're
Correct.
talking about maybe 100 square miles or something like that you need for,
Right.
you need a lot of area.
So I think the biggest concern has always been about the national airspace. And the one thing that the FAA has always been trying to put is how do you operate beyond line of sight? So, you know, there's, for the longest time, as long as you can maintain visual contact of the aircraft, and many times they said, oh, it operates very much like the traditional AMA or the Association of Model Aircraft, just RC pilots. However, the beyond line of sight operation now, you know, there's a lot of concerns. Okay, how do you, for example, be able to abort? Where can you do emergency landing? What do you do when you have sensor failure? Things of that nature. That makes the whole testing very, very
Those really add to the
convoluted.
dimensions of the testing, don't they? Because you've
Absolutely.
got not just the technical piece, which is the sensor and its performance, or the autopilot, its performance, you've got also the fault accommodation aspects. And that interacts with the topography or the geography, but in very close proximity, as opposed to remote proximity, which is where airplanes are. Airplanes have a lot of air under them,
Correct.
drones don't. And so we're talking about rapid decision-making, we're talking about informed decision-making. So there's decision-making, there's almost like behavioral characteristics in here as well. How does the crew? Because now we're talking about there's no man in here. Command's behind this box over here, and they're separated. So this is adding yet another dimension. This thing is like 8 cubes of dimension at this point in time in terms of deviation from what our total experience space has been. So you don't just start with a UAS test site that's going to be whole and up and running and fully competent right up front. It's going to take a lot of growth, isn't it? A lot of different layers of function added to it to get to the point of being able to test this stuff at the level needed. And are you finding that the manufacturers who are out here behind these systems are advising you or any other test sites as to what they think is important to measure? How are the manufacturers thinking about this? If I was a manufacturer, I want to do everything I could to avoid testing just because it's expensive, it's in some place I don't control, it isn't part of it's not nearby where I am, I have to travel to it, and there's a lot of money tied up in it and time. I would do everything I could to avoid having testing by various design means and such that prevent me from having to expose my systems. But where do we turn to? How do we turn to the manufacturers and ask them what it is that they need to be measured? And in fact, how do we measure it once we figure that out? These are all questions that have to be addressed, I think, before we can even define what a UAS test site is.
Yeah, I mean,
good maneuver, Paul.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Ted, you and I started discussing this regarding simulations and using computer-generated aspects to try and, try and make all these contingencies before we actually take it out into a prototype aspect. And that's a way. So we'll get about 90-95% accuracy.
Song and I have had that discussion many times in the past. We just had it just before you came here, and that was the subject of simulation, and a lot of really exotic simulation to capture modes, failure modes, sensor issues, rain, occluding the sensors, electromagnetic spectrum variations. If we could simulate that, if a test site could arise to that level of simulation capability and actually take the autopilot and such from here and put it into the simulation, so it's not just pure sim, it's hardware in the loop, and it's hardware and man in the loop. I think that would be a really good offering that a test site could have that would start knocking down the problems.
Yeah, I agree.
And reduce the cost.
Yeah. I mean, you've seen in everything that we do now that computer simulations and the use of computer software to start that testing process, which is very different than 30, 40 years ago when we had to make wooden models, clay models, and so forth, and try to get to that dynamic aspect of what we're trying to get to. We do, I would say, 80-90% of that in software. And it is accurate enough that we knock out 8 of the 10 prototypes that we make. And that's a huge saving because it's not only personnel, but it's just the sheer fact of making these all the time.
So, and that level of sophistication in simulated environmental modeling and operational modeling, it certainly is well known to the aerospace industry. It probably, I don't want to put words in the mouth of the drone industry, but I'll bet it's not well understood there because they're really coming from the RC orientation or they're coming from commercial airplane type thinking that's been depiloted, such as some of the large search and rescue and some of the large surveillance systems. But starting new, something like this, the folks doing this are coming out of the robotics game or out of the model airplane game. And those concepts of that high resolution, high accuracy simulation is just probably not present. That's my view anyway. For example, in commercial airplanes today, you really don't certify the airplane. You certify the sim and then show that every production airplane is no worse than the simulation. That's really what you do. There's so many points you could possibly test. You can't possibly test them all in the finite time we have in our lifetimes. So you find the 8 or a dozen points that really matter. You test those and show by simulation that if you cover those, you got everything else covered.
So, I mean, if I may add to that, I remember when I went to Paul's lab when he was at Drexel University, and he had a room that was kind of secured where they were testing all the different aspects of a UAV, and maybe he can make some comments about that, because I mean, it's about 10 years ago, but still the testing is the same, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, thanks for the reminder, Song. Yeah, it was about 10, 15 years ago. It was the idea of flying these aircraft, you know, be it in different gusts and different lighting areas, different rain conditions, brownouts, different types of blowing sand. These were all unknown, especially at this scale. And so we did exactly what you had mentioned, Ted, which is hardware in the loop. And the way we positioned ourselves as a university is kind of we're the honest brokers. You know, sensor plate companies would come, we can test and characterize their sensor under these different kind of conditions. We can go to aircraft companies and implement the aerodynamic model into the robot. So, you know, this became kind of a place to kind of just try to look at repeatability and sensor accuracies.
So that same thing would apply today at this scale. You're talking about a larger scale, I suspect. And
well, yeah. Again, you know, I was kind of joking when I bought my first quadcopter. It cost me $40,000. Right? It was more expensive than the car I was driving at the time. But you know, fast forward 10 years, and you can get it, you know, under $4,000, sometimes even under $400.
That's right.
So, you know, there's definitely a very rapid pace of the technology.
then another thing that goes through my mind all the time is that we're forever seeing changes in the FAA regulations and such. And this year, we should get the regulations called FAR 107, which will designate how 55-pound and less drones will be certified. And every indication is they'll be using a TSO approach, you know, technical standard requirements that will be performance-based requirements you must meet. And so there'll be these sort of soft requirements. I think it's up to you to how you're going to comply with them, and there'll be like an industry panel of some kind that will have a industry basis for how to comply, as opposed to the way the larger airplanes are certified today, which is to a specific set of requirements. But there will be requirements coming forth. Once requirements happen, now the issue of testing to make sure you've achieved those requirements, or even more so, the limitations under which your testing applies. If you can't test above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, for example, because you can't get an environment hotter than that, you probably can't certify it in that temperature range. So you're stuck to 100 or below. If you can't find a site that has stronger than 30-knot crosswinds or winds, you probably are limited to 30 knots in what you're able to sell. So the concept of requirements coming forth will then add another dimension of requirement to the sites. And I think the electronic aspect, pretty much all these commercial systems are on public radio frequencies, the 2.4, the 5.8 and such. And I believe there's going to be a change in that. So we're going to see probably software-defined radios or some other form of variable communication going on here. And then we're going to have to deal with the electromagnetic spectrum clearance and make sure we don't have mutual interaction, mutual interference. Or you turn your drone on and someone's heart monitor goes south, and you don't want to have that to happen. Plus, when we have 10,000 of these things in the same acre going on, the issue of electromagnetic interference will again rise up. So these are all things that in some way or other have to be evaluated, whether they're evaluated in the sites or in simulation, hardware in the loop, or whatever it might be, it's got to be done. So there's a big role out there, undefined to a certain extent.
Yeah, it's definitely a new frontier. Right? And I think there's going to be a lot of, like, you know, failures and successes. It's going to evolve, very much like the automobile industry also is going to start.
When we get back from this next break, let's talk about how conceptually that might occur in the most effective way in some of these FAA test sites that have been designated for the various states. When we get back from our break.
Aloha, I'm Kili'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the Think Tech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week, we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii. that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to Think Tech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
Live for the Hawaii in downtown Honolulu, and our guest Paul O, from all the way from Nevada, came just for this show. Thanks so much for coming on,
Great
Paul.
to be here, Ted.
And of course, Song Choi,
Always good to
one
see you,
of the
Ted.
frequent flyers at the show here. And by the way, folks, you know, you can turn to this show for any of the current and relevant information on drones anytime, and you can send us messages and such, except perhaps for next Friday. Next Friday is April 1st, also known as April Fool's Day. You might want to think carefully about the information you get from this show next Friday.
Or any show.
Any show on a Friday, right. So we were just talking with Song and then with Song and Paul about the issues that confront those who are charged with going to put together a UAV test site along the lines of the unspecified requirements FAA has issued. And the conversations we've had led to a quite wide range of things that one might want to think about. And then now we turn to the people who have the fiduciary responsibility to do that. Exactly what do they invest in, and what do they invest in first? That's got to be a mind boggler. And then they've got to convince their legislature to invest the money in it. So moving forward in this game of sort of a unclear future is a tough one, but it's got to be done. We have this compulsion is that we're manufacturing these things at $3 million a year, and we're heading into requirements that haven't been written yet. And then the testing and such have to be done in such a way that we can verify we can meet requirements once they get written. What we're going to see is a lot of these things probably get grounded, right? They'll self-ground when they run into a wall, or they will be grounded because they will be unable to be compliant with whatever the rules might be, which is another aspect of the testing that has to come into the picture. So, not to put you on the spot as the state of Nevada, Paul, or us as the state of Hawaii, or our friends in Alaska, but what would you think of as the first thing you want to do in setting up a UAS test site?
Well, what's the first thing you want to... I think you really need to classify what type of aircraft you're working with, and again, for what purposes. I think one of the biggest drivers that a lot of pilots of these type of aircraft are confronted with is they want to get commercialized, right?
That's right.
They want to start generating income with this,
That's
whether it is, you know, shooting wedding photos or assisting, you know, firefighters and being able to give an eye in the sky. So, you know, we have these type of things happening both in Europe and in Canada. People are making money flying drones. You know, that's a big driver. So whatever can we do to enable that to happen, I think is going to be a positive. A lot of times, you know, people have the misconception that this is completely, you know, no person in the loop. But in these type of instances of aerial photography or aerial journalism, there is a person on the loop. So how do we get the pilot to be certified and licensed, just like you would have them being licensed to drive a vehicle?
That's right.
Okay, you go through a number of maybe written tests, you know, actual flight tests.
That's an interesting perspective. Start from the end game. The end game is the pressure that's brought to bear on the legislature is going to come from those who are being harmed because they can't get these things going. That's going to be the low end photojournalists, the video folks, the people who take pictures and use these basically as camera platforms. They're the ones who are going to be putting the pressure on. So solve their problem first.
Correct.
Very interesting point. Don't solve the manufacturer's problem, solve the user's problem. And so therefore a capability of generating income, the enablement of the pilot, the equipment, and the environment around it, and the rules, and probably the training that would then allow you to operate that, and probably the law enforcement aspects that would be necessary for policing and managing and making sure. So that is interesting. If you then following your logic, there's certain of these systems that would comply or that would be of that type, and there's others that are more exotic and aren't in that domain. So you start with that. So start with, I'm going to use this stuff. I'll give you credit for it, Paul. Or Song, we'll give you both credit for it, but that's a brilliant idea. Start with the end game. Start with what the users are going to see value in, and then work backwards from there.
Yeah,
So,
and the thing is, we're not starting from scratch. I mean, we've seen these type of systems. You know, robotic helicopters have been flown in
Many
Japan
years,
for what, maybe three
Yeah.
decades
Yep,
for
many
crop
years.
dusting. And, you know, it was because pesticides are a danger for people.
So
you
in
know,
the limited time we have left here, so we have the capability of generating revenue for, say, the 55 pounders or less, might as well stick with the rules, right?
Right.
So first thing, after we decide that's who we're gonna focus on, is what's next? A isolated region of certain acreage or something like that that would define a reasonable test site? If it's just these kind of guys working in the vertical environment, you can get by with a fairly small, you don't need a large area if it's not fixed wing. And it's probably fair to say it won't be fixed wing in that first lot of, the by and large are gonna be quad rotors or some kind of rotor systems, just because they don't have the skill requirements that fixed wing have. So if you zero in on that, you're talking, you can restrict the area quite a bit. That makes it a lot more practical. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's go forward from there. So we have 10 more minutes to come up with our complete set of requirements here. So an area big enough to handle the typical operation, which I'll just nominally say is a 500-meter radius around the operator. Fair?
Sounds fair.
That's probably line of sight.
Line of
more or less.
sight. Right.
So a 500-meter radius. And you'd want to have it probably in a variety of terrains where you have whatever the terrain is in your site. If it's Kansas, it probably wants to be flat. If it's Hawaii, it wants to have a lot of vertical, a lot of wind shear, a lot of rain. So the Ko'olaus, somewhere in the mountains would be, so in relevant environment. This sounds like a TRL, like a technology readiness level index of some kind. What would be the third thing? So we probably need range safety of some kind. We got to keep people out of the area.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we need a perimeter control of some kind. So we need, actually I'm thinking in terms of the island of Lanai, which is very much like what we're speaking of here. This is actually very useful to us. How about electromagnetic clearance or spectrum sweeping and this sort of thing, and making sure we don't have somebody surreptitiously sucking information from us, let alone interfering with us in some inadvertent way. So we need some way to keep the spectrum clear.
Right, but then you start, you know, adding more and more of these type of hurdles. It just becomes even
You're gonna run out in 10
less
minutes for
right.
that.
Right? You know, the nice thing is that we actually see insurance companies also getting into the game, right? And if you're really trying to make a livelihood using these type of systems, you know, to film weddings, for example, okay, you know, the customer is going to say, "Are you a licensed pilot? Can I see your license?" Right? And it's to the pilot and as a business operator, it is in his or her own best interest make sure that they can film this properly.
That's right.
Right?
So you
It's a
better get your
revenue
license.
stream. Right. I'm also insured.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if something should happen, you say, "Hey, you know, you're filming my wedding. I don't want to be sued for the crash." It's, "No, I have my insurance as well." It's just like as if you were a driver, right? I'm going to be working for a taxi company, working for UPS. Here's my license. I'm insured.
Therefore, implying extrapolating from what you said, get the insurance companies involved so they understand how to write policies that include drone operations.
Yeah.
And don't make them outgate them. So
Right.
insurance, that's now, going back to this couple of acres we got here that's going to have a 500-meter radius, we need some kind of perimeter security. We need some kind of credentialing of people who come in and come out. How about range communication? We probably wouldn't need anything other than the communications that the system has with itself. We wouldn't need any special communication device to observe or relay observations as such. We would just depend on the system's own communication. I mean, Motorola radios would be all we need for like patrol officers and this sort of thing. So we don't need to have a big expensive communication system. How about a computer system or some other flight physics aspects? We've got to record the flight physics. We've got to get the location, and we've got to get the velocities and accelerations and the motions and this sort of thing. So we need some kind of a video or some kind of a radar system. Maybe radar is the answer, huh? Some kind of a radar system to track position.
Are you just trying to maybe monitor, you know, pilot performance, or are you talking more of like a black box?
Well, that's a good question. Again, it's we're taking this idea of what's the minimum necessary to measure for getting something like this in the hands of the legal dimensions and in the insurable domain, and the easily trainable domain, and easily enforced domain. So what do we have to test and measure in order to assure that we have achieved the right level of safety, reliability, and ease of operation and such? So I'm just thinking radar or some other means to identify the three-dimensional location in space in order to understand, for example, how the system responds to control inputs, or how interruptions in radio communication might cause the system to get out of position or whatever. But we'll need some form of reconciliation of what the location is, I would think. So I'm just adding up the cost here. We got a couple of acres of land, we got some perimeter, we got radar system. We're looking at $300K to get going, right?
This is kind of interesting because you're adding up the actual certification necessities as well as a test site. A test site can just be an open site, right?
Right.
You're there and it's a test site and it's kind of secured and
I get the
isolated,
ground piece.
so you can make the mistakes and get it out of the way. So I don't know. I mean, there's a balance that I think you're trying
Has
to look for
anybody
here.
actually thought this thing through from a perspective, as you're pointing out here?
You're
Take the
doing it
end
right now.
users and end users' requirements and come up with a minimum path towards the future that the users, the dominant users, would salute.
Right, and I think you're looking, so are you certifying pilots? Very much like, hey, I'm a driver, I don't care what car it is, maybe you're bringing your own car to the test range, or the DMV provides you the car, and you're supposed to drive, and you're going to show that you could do the minimum type of things, merges, traffic, parking, things like that. It's the same thing here. So it's I think it's the pilots, and then there's the vehicles. Vehicles, I think, are going to apply, basically, the manufacturer's going to apply to make sure that it's
The reason I brought this up is it's a relevant issue here, because we have all the sites are attempting to find some place of success. We may be heading to a meeting in Texas next week that Texas A&M, TEEX, is having a conference on Tuesday, and that Tuesday through Thursday. And some of these issues are going to come up. And we're in touch with the Alaska group and two Nevada aspects, you as well as Mike, I think Dykem is his name, down in Reno. And we've got connections and others, and I'm just wondering how we pull all that information and pull it into a sort of a homogenized frame of reference that would say, here's what a test site kind of looks like, so you can kind of price it out. I mean, our legislature is asking the question, and I think we need to be forthcoming and make sure we tell them enough of the story and get their support. So, but I really, this idea you brought to us about starting with the end user and start with the most dominant and the most upfront user and work backwards, that's really great. So we don't have any time. We ran this right to the ground here, and we haven't even gotten very far in the conversation. So next time you're back here, Paul, we'll get you again and tell you how this has developed. But I would like to take on the role of putting together these requirements from this conversation, include the two of you in it, as well as Alaska and Texas.
Maybe we could have them on a video conference on this thing. And
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We're pretty good at Skype here, and they have Skype in Nevada, don't they?
Yeah, sure they do.
Right. Okay.
Turn a computer around and have them face the thing, and
Right, the virtual me.
the virtual.
But thanks so much for coming on. Thanks for coming out here and the other meetings we've had this week, and looking forward to a strong connection in the future. In fact, we will be in Las Vegas the 5th and 6th of June or something like that for a National Fire Prevention Agency conference, and we'll be talking about another issue of drones that you might be interested in. That's how you take something like this that has all this new dimension of information generation and puts it in the hands of a very straightforward incident command system. But that's a whole different thing. But it feeds right back into test sites. So Paul, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me on the
Always
show.
good to see you, Ted.
And
Good to see you again, Paul.
we'll get you back here, Paul, one way or the other. Thanks very much, folks. And at this point, we'll sign off for today.